وأقول في القرآن ما جاءت به آياته فهو الكريم المنزال وأقول قال الله جل جلاله والمصطفى الهادي ولا أتأول.
الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على عبد الله ورسوله نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Welcome to another parents webinar for the parents of our AMAU junior students who are part of the AMAU junior program. And as you all know by now, we try and aim to have regular webinars with the parents where we present certain topics and also where we get a chance to have questions and answers from parents about the issues that matter to them. Now, for today, there's a slight change to the program. Sheikh Abdurrahman, Hafidahullah Ta'ala, isn't going to be available today due to some personal issue which has come up. So the Sheikh, he asked if it's possible that we could take his part tomorrow. So what we've done is we're going to divide this webinar into two parts, today and tomorrow. Tomorrow I'll be with you as well. So it'll be myself along with Sheikh Abdurrahman, the two of us together. However, today, what I would like to do is I have some points that I would like to share with you and I'll introduce the topic as well. But I would also like to hear questions on this particular topic because your questions help us to focus the discussion on what matters to you, inshallah. So today, this is 7 p.m. UK time. We are going to do the first half, which is with me. I'm going to present to you what the topic's going to be. I'm going to present to you a short discussion on the topic, and I'm going to take some questions to get an idea of the things that you are thinking about. And then, inshallah, tomorrow at the same time, 7 p.m. UK time, 10 p.m. Dubai time, we're going to have another webinar for the parents. And this one is going to be myself along with Ustad Abdurrahman. And Ustad Abdurrahman has some important points that he wanted to share. So he really wanted to be with us today. Something came up which meant that he wasn't able to. But because he's prepared some things that he wants to share with you and he really wants to share them with you, we decided to basically extend the webinar until tomorrow. So inshallah, we'll have probably around 45 minutes today, possibly up to an hour. And then inshallah, around about the same time tomorrow, 7 p.m. UK time, 10 p.m. Dubai time, inshallah ta'ala. So as you know, these parents webinars, they have a different topic every time that we do them. Every month we do them, or every time that we do them, we try to present a different topic. And this is a topic that was highlighted by the AMAU team and the AMAU teachers as being particularly important. And that is the role of the father in teaching, educating, raising, and giving tarbiyah to his children. And what we see, and of course, we have sort of a lot of interaction with parents, with the children. We see, alhamdulillah, there are a number of fathers who are engaged and who are keen for their children and who are playing a major role in the tarbiyah of their children. But at the same time, it feels like there is a gap or there is an opportunity for improvement among many families in terms of the role of the father in the tarbiyah of the child and the role of the father in that education and in taking this child on this journey towards becoming a person of knowledge. So that's what we want to talk about today, insha'Allah ta'ala. I'm going to just start by talking about the very famous dua that we all know, the dua of the child for the parent. The dua of the child for the parent. إما يبلغن عندك الكبر أحدهما أو كلاهما فلا تقل لهما أف ولا تنهرهما وقل لهما قولا كريما واخفض لهما جناح الذل من الرحمة وقل رب ارحمهما كما ربياني صغيرا. This dua, almost everybody will have heard of this dua before. the ayah says, if one or both of your parents reach old age, do not say even uff to them. Don't even say even the smallest word of censure or rebuke. Don't even say uff to them. فَلَا تَقُلْ لَهُمَا أُفٍّ وَلَا تَنْهَرْهُمَا. And don't push them away or make them feel like they're being pushed away. وَقُلْ لَهُمَا قَوْلًا كَرِيمًا. And say to them a noble word, a noble statement. وَاخْفِضْ لَهُمَا جَنَاحَ الظُّلِّ مِنَ الرَّحْمَةِ. And lower the wing of mercy to them. And say, and here comes the dua, رَبِّ ارْحَمْهُمَا كَمَا رَبَّيَانِي صَغِيرًا. My Lord, have mercy on those two, and my two parents, because both of them raised me when I was small. Both of them gave me tarbiyah when I was small. The literal translation of the dua, رَبِّ ارْحَمْهُمَا, my Lord, have mercy on those two, كَمَا رَبَّيَانِي, as those two did tarbiyah for me, صغيرا, when I was younger. The first thing that you notice about this dua is that the tarbiyah aspect, and tarbiyah means to nurture and to educate and to instill manners and values into your child and to assist them in as they grow up. That concept of tarbiyah in the ayah is attributed to both parents. It doesn't say, have mercy on my mother because she looked after me and did my tarbiyah for me. She educated me and she nurtured me when I was small. It says the two of them nurtured me when I was small. كَمَا رَبَّيَانِي. The two of them nurtured me when I was small. And that shows that the default position when it comes to tarbiyah and the default concept in Islam of tarbiyah is that tarbiyah is a shared obligation between the mother and the father. It's not the case that the mother raises children and the father works. That's not what the ayah tells us. The ayah tells us the child makes dua for their parents because the mother and the father played a role in the tarbiyah of that child when that child was small. And that for me is a really profound concept that tells us that the father has a major role to play in tarbiyah, such that such a generic dua for your parents specifically mentions the tarbiyah of the father for that child. So this tells us that this concept of tarbiyah, and tarbiyah is a broad topic. It's a broad term for educating your child, for nurturing them, for raising them, for them growing up into adults, teaching them values and morals and manners, teaching them their religion, and raising them as practicing Muslims. All of that can be termed tarbiyah, nurturing and developing them when they were small. And that role, there is a role for the mother and there is a role for the father. To add to that and to emphasize how important this role is, we have a very important hadith. In this hadith, the hadith of Ma'qil ibn Yasar, that he narrated from the Messenger, radiyallahu anhu, that he narrated from the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, that he said, ما من عبد يسترعيه الله رعيه يموت يوم يموت وهو غاش لرعيته إلا حرم الله عليه الجنة. There is no person that Allah gives responsibility to or responsibility of others to him. There is no person that Allah has given responsibility over other people to. And on the day that he dies, he dies having betrayed the people he was responsible for, except that Allah makes Jannah haram for him. Now, if we take this hadith and we add to it the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, "Ala kullukum ra'in wa kullukum mas'ulun an ra'iyatih." All of you are shepherds and all of you will be asked about your flock. And then the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam highlighted that the father, the man of the house, is a shepherd, and he will be asked about his household. He will be asked about his children. He will be asked about his household. He will be asked about his family. So in that case, he is a ra'in. He is a shepherd. He is responsible for his family and for his children. In that case, he has to fall under this hadith. ما من عبد يسترعيه الله رعية يموت يوم يموت وهو غاش لرعيته إلا حرم الله عليه الجنة أو كما قال صلى الله عليه وسلم. There is no person that Allah makes a shepherd over the people or makes a leader over the people or gives responsibility for others to that person. And on the day they die having cheated the people that they were responsible for, except that Allah makes Jannah haram for them. And that is a scary thought for fathers who are responsible for their children and responsible for their families, their spouses, and responsible for their household. That if they die having cheated and betrayed the people in their house, the women of their house, their spouses, their wives, their children, the people in their household that they are responsible for, and they die having betrayed those people or having cheated those people, then Allah makes Jannah haram for them, meaning haram for them in the first instance. And they will not enter Jannah in the first instance. There will be a punishment that Allah Azza wa Jalla has decreed for them, and they will not be from the people who will enter Jannah along with the people who enter Jannah without punishment. So this is a very serious issue. And the term here of betrayal or cheating those people, there are many, many ways that that could happen. It doesn't just mean cheating them financially or otherwise. The word is general and it's taken generally in the most general sense. So it could even be cheating them from their rights, withholding their rights from them, cheating them in terms of their religion, not taking that responsibility that Allah gave. Every one of you is going to be asked about your household. The husband in that house is going to be asked about his spouse. He's going to be asked about his children. It's not the case that the mother will be asked about her children and the father will be asked about his wife. Rather, the father will be asked about the wife and the children and the household. And the mother will be asked about the household and the children. So the father has the greater share of responsibility here. وَلِلرِّجَالِ عَلَيْهِنَّ دَرَجَةٌ. Men have a degree of responsibility over them. That degree of responsibility comes with a danger. It doesn't come without a cost. That Allah Azza wa Jalla said, الرِّجَالُ قَوَّامُونَ عَلَى النِّسَاءِ. Men are responsible for women. It doesn't come without a cost. There is a cost. There is a danger to it. And that is that man will be asked about how he behaved with regard to that responsibility and how he behaved with regard to those children. And so if we focus now on the specific topic at hand, which is the tarbiyah of those children, educating them, conveying to them the morals and manners and values of Islam, raising them as good Muslims. If the father falls short in this, first of all, he is going to be asked about it. Allah is going to ask him about it. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to take him to account for it. Because he was given that darajah, he was given that responsibility and that position of leadership and authority. So he's going to be asked about how he used it. He's going to be asked about the decisions he made, and he's going to be asked about what he did for those children and their raised, and how they were raised, and how they were nurtured, and how they were taught. And likewise, if he falls short to the point that he has been seen to have cheated them or to have betrayed them in what he was given, the responsibility he was given, he could be from those people who do not enter Jannah because of that. This being said, and how serious this topic is, it makes sense that a father should be involved directly in the tarbiyah of his children. And that is because it's not enough to delegate something so important. There's nothing wrong with a husband delegating aspects of tarbiyah to his wife, because at the end of the day, the two of them share the responsibility of tarbiyah, of raising and nurturing those kids. So there's nothing wrong with the husband delegating aspects of that tarbiyah to his wife. But as for saying that the husband is absent from that tarbiyah and says to his wife, this is your thing, these are your kids, you do something with them, and the husband is absent, then this could well be the ghish, the cheating and the betrayal, which is mentioned in the hadith, that causes a person to not to enter paradise, because they have been relaxed, or they have been easygoing when it comes to this huge responsibility that Allah has given them. Nothing wrong with delegating aspects of it, but not to be an absent father, or to be someone who is absent from that process because of the severity of it and the severity of the responsibility that Allah has placed upon the father in it. I don't want to take too much of Sheikh Abdul Rahman's presentation, and I don't know from which angle he's going to take it. So I wanted to leave some of that until tomorrow. But I thought it would be nice to talk about questions, or to hear from yourselves some of the questions that you might have with regard to the role of the father in tarbiyah of the children, and what fathers can do in terms of the Islamic education of their children and supporting their children's Islamic education. I'll mention a couple of things while we are collating questions. And I know the AMAU team are going to pick some questions for me, and I guess you're going to highlight them for me in this screen that I have here, which is off camera. But I just wanted to sort of highlight a couple of things. First of all, the general way that the father sets out the household. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, "Ar-rijalu qawwamuna 'ala an-nisa." Men have responsibility over the women in their household. This responsibility means that the man, as the head of the household, has to set a certain environment and a certain tone and a certain expectation in his household. If he doesn't set it, who is expected to set it after him? Is it expected that his wife will go against the trend of the house? And that she will kind of, almost take the example of Asiya, alayhi salam, and completely, go against the trend of her husband and do something totally different for her children. Yeah, it could happen, but that's not how it should be. The father should set the environment in the household, the tone of the household, the feeling and the motivation in the household, and the expectation that the whole family will be engaged in seeking knowledge and in coming near to Allah and in worshiping Allah. And really, if the father sets that in the house, the whole family will follow from that lead. And that's the reason he was given that responsibility and that daraja and that qawama, that responsibility and leadership, to be able to set that tone in the house and that environment in the house. And it's really hard if the father is pulling in the other direction and the mother is pulling in the other direction. It's very, very hard then for the children to achieve the most that they can possibly achieve in terms of their Islamic learning. So one thing is to do with setting the environment. And I also wanted for you to think a little bit about the difference in the tarbiyah of the father and the mother. There's no doubt that there is a tarbiyah that only a mother can give. And there is a tarbiyah that you could argue only a father can give. And when you put those two together, you get something that resembles a proper tarbiyah of a child. Of course, there are circumstances where you cannot. There are single parents. There are situations where people have passed away. Those situations are unique. And that's perhaps why Islam gave so much emphasis to looking after the yatim, the orphan. The orphan is the one whose father passes away when they are less than the age of adulthood. The one who loses their father less than the age of adulthood. And there are unique circumstances with regard to that. But if we talk about a situation where mother and father are present for the child, then there is a different tarbiyah comes from each one. And I'm always amazed at the role a father has to play in setting Islamic values and morals. And for example, the way that the role that a man typically has in the society, the role that a man typically has on a day-to-day basis, and the role that a woman typically has on a day-to-day basis, those roles being somewhat different, they lead each one of them to have a unique type of tarbiyah that is associated with them. So the way that the mother has the love, the care, the attention she spent for her children, that comes across when she nurtures them, and the kind of things she nurtures them towards, and the kind of akhlaq, behaviors that she nurtures them towards. And the father also has a different kind of tarbiyah. There are different aspects to it. There are different behaviors, different kinds of morals and manners, and a different aspect to the way that the father educates and nurtures the children. And that's why the most complete form of tarbiyah would be the one that is mentioned in the dua, where the mother and father together, they come together. Each one of them contributes their own unique qualities in the tarbiyah of that child. So I just wanted us to think about that. And again, I don't want to sort of take too much of the presentation away from tomorrow. Let's have a look at some of the questions so we can get a little bit of a feeling about what you guys are experiencing and thinking. And then inshallah ta'ala, we can prepare for that and integrate that into our discussion tomorrow as well. How do we involve fathers who feel like it's the mother's job to teach Islam to the children because they're out earning money for the family? And fathers who think it's enough to send their children to madrasa for an Islamic education with minimal to no input at home. So I think you highlighted two very common and very important questions. The first being the father who is busy working, as many fathers are. And the father says, my role is to work and earn money, and your role is to teach the kids Islam. I think partially we answered that with regard to the dua. If you want your children to make dua for you when you're old, then you both need to have contributed to that tarbiyah. There's no doubt that the father and the mother's time may be different. And that's not to stereotype, or not to be stereotypical, because actually there are a number of different situations. But let's just talk about a situation where father is working long hours and most of the time the kids are spent at home with mom. That's a situation where you could imagine the father saying, look, I'm out working all the time. It's your responsibility. So I think there are two things I would answer to that. The first is with regard to the dua, that the father has to take a share of that according to his ability. فَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ مَا اسْتَطَعْتُمْ. Fear Allah as much as you can. Have as much taqwa as you can. So take as much as you can. The father is for certain going to see his children from time to time. It's not going to be the fact that he doesn't see his children at all. Then we're getting into a single parent kind of scenario. But in a situation where both parents are available for the child, there's going to be times where the father has time to spend with the child. And that time should be valuable time, and it should be time that adds to the tarbiyah of the child. So even if it is just half an hour that the father sees the child every day, even if it is just the weekend that the father sees the child, or one day in the weekend that the father sees the child, that time should be geared towards tarbiyah. It's not like we're saying to the father that you should give 20, 30, 40 hours of tarbiyah to your kids every week. Because if you're working 40, 50-hour weeks, that's very difficult. But when you are with your children, you should be playing a role. That's one thing. And the second answer to that question is what we mentioned with regard to the father's role in setting the standards and the expectations in the household, supporting his wife, giving her encouragement, having some goals that he wants for his children, and monitoring that progress, and being someone who kind of, all men, or most of us, we appreciate being responsible for our families. And, we kind of almost take a certain amount of, I don't know if the right word is pride, but a certain amount of there's a certain prestige to being responsible for your family. But that comes, it's a double-edged sword that comes with responsibility. So set the standards, tell your spouse what we want from the kids, decide together, plan together how you're going to educate those children and support those children in their education, so that in the end of the day, even if the father is not able to spend 30, 40 hours with his kids doing that, at least a few hours that he does spend are focused and organized, and they have a clear goal in mind. So that's one thing. I'm really concerned about fathers and mothers who think it's okay to send their children to Islamic institutions, or even to a certain extent to subscribe to a madrasatul Umariyah or anything else, and that's enough. Just put my child in front of a YouTube video and they will somehow learn Islam. Someone else will do it for me. Take them to the masjid. Someone else will do it for me. Take them to a madrasa. Someone else will do it for me. This is a problem from father and mother, mom and dad. It's a problem on both sides. And the reason is that it takes away from the mas'uliyah. It makes a person feel like they're not responsible. There's nothing wrong with delegating. There's nothing wrong with me choosing a Qur'an teacher for my children and not teaching them the Qur'an personally, but deciding that I want a Qur'an teacher to take over that responsibility. There's no problem. But who is mas'ul? Who is responsible for their learning of the Qur'an? It's me, right? Before everybody else. In my children, I am the one who is responsible for my child learning the Qur'an. Whether I delegate it to my wife, or I delegate it to a Qur'an teacher, or I delegate it to a madrasa, but I'm mas'ul. And at work, and we talk to, let's talk to the dads in the way they understand. At work, if you are mas'ul, if you are responsible for delivering a project, are you in touch with it and up to date with it and observing it? Or are you someone who, like every 6 months, you just kind of look in and say, okay, yeah, for sure. At work, if you are mas'ul, you are directly engaged. You're directly involved in where is this project going? What have you done today? What has happened today? How has the progress gone? So if you've got a Qur'an teacher for your children, you need to still have that sense of responsibility. So nothing wrong with a madrasa or an online madrasa or madrasatul Umariyah or anything else in terms of a means to support teaching your children, but not at the expense of the mas'uliyah, the responsibility of teaching them, which the father and mother both need to feel that responsibility. So delegation is a good thing, but as long as it doesn't remove the sense of responsibility and oversight from the father and mother. What if the father doesn't want to have anything to do with raising them and just wants to provide for them financially? I think that in this, if you listen to the beginning of my lecture, I tried a little bit with the carrot and the stick. So the carrot is, if you want your children to make dua for you when you are old or when you passed away, and you want to be from those people that are raised in Jannah, many levels. And then the man turns and he says, Anna hada. Where did this come from? This is not my deeds. My deeds didn't bring me to this place in Jannah. And it said to him, بِدُعَاءِ وَلَدِكَ لَكَ أو كما قال, because your child made dua for you. So this man, his level in Jannah was raised because his child made dua for him. And if you want to be someone who your children do birr for you, they do righteousness towards you, and someone who your children make dua for you, and someone who your children raise your rank in Jannah by the permission of Allah, then the best way to do that is to be involved in their tarbiyah and not just to provide for them financially. That's the first answer to the question. The stick is the hadith that we mentioned, ما من عبد يسترعيه الله رعية يموت يوم يموت وهو غاش لرعيته إلا حرم الله عليه الجنة أو كما قال صلى الله عليه وسلم. That there is no person that Allah gives responsibility to other people, or responsibility over other people to that person. And then when they die in a state where they have cheated the people they were responsible for, except that Allah makes Jannah haram for them. So we would say to that father, don't be from the people who your children are the cause for you to be prohibited from Jannah. And don't be from the people who your children are a reason for you to be punished Yawm al-Qiyamah. But be from those people who your children are a cause for your rank to be raised Yawm al-Qiyamah, and for your position in Jannah to be given a higher position in Jannah because of your children. So that's the carrot and the stick. And that's what I would suggest to talk to a father about who says that I just pay the bills. I don't have any other role than that. What is the responsibility of the father when children, especially daughters, become adults? So that's a really good question. We have a nice series on the AMAU YouTube channel, which is freely available for anyone to watch. It's called The Muslim Family. And in there, I did talk about it quite extensively, the responsibility of the father when the children become adults. But since the question asked specifically about daughters, so as a daughter gets older, one of the responsibilities of the father is to help her to find a good husband. And that as she becomes an adult and she becomes older, that is one of the major responsibilities, not the only responsibility, but it's one of the major responsibilities of the father towards his daughters who are adult, towards his adult daughters. In the series, we mentioned a number of different things, responsibilities of mothers and fathers towards their children. So maybe we can go back to that there as they become adults. If they are already married, then the primary responsibility of that daughter is towards her husband more than it is towards her parents. The primary responsibility, like the majority of the weight of responsibility is towards her husband. However, her father she still has a responsibility of birr, of righteousness towards her parents. And so her parents, again, may offer her good advice and support her in her adult life. And I don't know if that answered the question or not. What is the role of a stepfather when it comes to tarbiyah of his wife's young children? So if we look at the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, there is no better example than that. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam had several, if the right term is stepchildren, i.e. children of his wives that were not his children. And the role in that, while the stepfather never takes the place of a father, and that's not what Islam came with. Islam didn't come to erase the biological father. And Islam doesn't give the stepfather the same rights as the father. There's no doubt that the stepfather is one of the closest people to the rights of the father, as is the stepmother, one of the closest people to the rights of the mother, even if they don't reach that level. So the stepfather needs to be just and fair towards them. He needs to take care of them in the way that he has, with that responsibility that he's taken on. And in terms of tarbiyah, to do his best to give tarbiyah to those children, to do his best for that as much as he can, and to follow the example of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in that. And Allah Azza wa Jalla knows best. What's the ruling with regard to a father divorced from the mother that doesn't want much involvement in the child's life? Here it mentions if the child is autistic. So the child has that involvement in terms of financially, but doesn't want to be regularly involved. So in a situation where custody belongs to the mother, I think what we would say to the child is that you need to have that birr and that righteousness towards both parents, towards your mother and towards your father, even if your father is somewhat absent. And that being the case, the father has a role to play. And we would say that even if the father and mother are separated, and it's a little difficult when we're talking about an autistic child because that adds complications, but let's start about talking about any child. Any child has to see that the fact that their parents are separated or divorced doesn't mean that the rights of the parents have been separated or divorced, that there is no right to the father because I don't live with the father, or there is no right to the mother because I live with my father, for example. It should be the case that rights are given to both. And the child should be brought up to see that I have rights towards my biological father, even if I don't live with him. And if that's the case, then that shows us that there is still very much a relationship there. What would I recommend in this case? It's a little difficult. The child presumably has some very specific and special needs with related to their condition of autism. And we're talking about that in terms of a father who doesn't really want to be involved. Again, we would say at least to dangle a carrot in front of him of this child being a reason for him to be raised in paradise, by having some involvement in the life of the child, by supporting the mother, even if they are divorced, in a way that's appropriate to their situation. I'm not sure if I can answer any more specifically than that, but perhaps, I would say that if we look at it from the angle of the child, if the child is still required to be righteous towards mother and father, then that relationship with the father should not be dead, because from the child's side, it isn't. And therefore, from the father's side, it shouldn't be either. And Allah knows best. If the husband and wife both work, but want to take their child out of public school to avoid the harm or fitna and start homeschooling them, is it possible to do? Do you have any advice on this? Yeah, I believe it's absolutely possible to do. It's not easy, but it is possible. If the father and mother both work identical shifts, so it's the case that there is nobody at that particular time to look after the children, and the children are young, too young to be by themselves, then there would have to be some kind of appropriate childcare or appropriate tuition at that time of someone who's going to look after the child at that time. And I think one of the greatest things about homeschooling is the flexibility to do whatever you want. There's nothing that says that you have to teach your child 9 o'clock in the morning until 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Homeschooling is flexible. You can be flexible with them. But obviously the difficulty in that situation is just making sure that there is someone who looks after the child during that time. But for example, let's just say there is a general, for want of a better word, what's the right word? Someone who looks after the child at that time who's not engaged in their education. Grandparents or someone who comes to look after the kids during the time mom and dad are at work, but they're not involved directly. They're not a tutor. So in this time, it would be important that the child has schoolwork to do and catch up on. For example, let's just say mom and dad work 9 to 5, both of them. And they choose to teach their children, for example, on an evening, 6 till 8, and on a weekend. That's when they teach their kids. And there is grandparents, for example, who look after the children from 9 to 5. They look after the children. So for sure, the children should have work set that enables them to make use of that time, whether it's Islamic studies, whether it is worldly sciences, but they have homework to do and they have work to do. They maybe have some videos selected for them to watch, maybe some workbooks for them to do, maybe even some online tutors who the grandparents don't have to be directly involved in teaching the kids, but they can observe that they have a tutor and they've signed in online and the tutor is teaching them. Maybe it's a case of a part-time school like a madrasa or something like that, which the kids go to, or a tahfidh a markaz tahfidh, which is the kids go to a tahfidh center for memorizing Qur'an. But in any case, there is someone looking after the kids. But even if that person looking after the kids is not an educator, the kids will have work assigned to them. And I believe it's absolutely doable. You can homeschool your kids 7 o'clock at night until 8:30 at night, and then on the weekends, and the kids can have a complete education, inshallah, with support from some tuition, some homework clubs, perhaps grandparents, or, the person who comes to look after the kids in the house while the parents are at work. If the parents have shifts that don't match each other, it could be easier, because it could be the case that each parent takes the child at a particular time and they share the homeschooling responsibility. But wallahi, the more I see from public school in every country, the more concerned I am. Okay, Islamic schools are better, but it's the situation in school at the moment. If there is any way that you can take your children out of it, take them out. If there is any way, if there's any possibility at any kind of feasible cost that you can take your children out of school, well, I see it to be absolutely obligatory. 100%. I have no hesitation in saying if there is any way to take your children out of school, then I believe it's an obligation for you to do so. Because, and I'm talking about the non-Islamic schools at this moment in time. Maybe Islamic schools, we can maybe not say it's an obligation, but the non-Islamic schools, what the kids are exposed to is so harmful to their religion and so harmful in so many ways. I mean, parents tend to focus on, kids being taught inappropriate material, things like that. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. In reality, the amount of kufr, the amount of fisq, the amount of just, fahisha and immorality that the kids are exposed to every single day, I can't see how anyone could allow a child to stay in that environment unless it was a necessity for them. And the Islamic schools may be somewhat better. I don't think they fully solve the problem, but perhaps at least they solve some of it, and Allah knows best. We've seen from our fathers and grandfathers that children are meant to fear the father. How much fear aspect does Islam recommend the father has it, if it allows it at all? I think the father should have a haiba. The father should have a presence which people respect. When the father comes home, when the father is in the room, when the father speaks, yeah, for sure, the kids should respect his presence. But I don't feel that it should reach the level of fear, because I don't think that's how the Prophet ﷺ used to be. Look at how the Prophet ﷺ used to be with Anas. When he would send Anas out for a task, and Anas would forget and play with the boys, and he would come to him and he would, remind him gently, but he didn't used to scold people and he didn't used to shout at them. He didn't raise his hand to a woman or to an animal, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And he never said to Anas, why did you do this or why didn't you do that? So for me, I'm not saying that the father should never say to a child, why did you do this or why didn't you do that? But just that this idea that the father should be feared and only feared is probably not in line with how the Prophet ﷺ used to be. But should the father have a haiba, a presence, and a respect among his children? Absolutely. But that presence doesn't have to mean fear. It doesn't have to mean that there is no, for example, the famous hadith of the man who said to the Prophet ﷺ that I have 10 children. I never kissed one of them ever. The Prophet ﷺ said to him, Man la yarham, la yurham. Or kama qal. The one who doesn't show mercy will not be shown mercy. The Prophet ﷺ used to pick up Al-Hasan, Al-Hussein, and he used to kiss them, and he used to let them climb on his back, and he used to let them climb in front of or walk in front of the minbar when he was speaking. There is a place for the haiba, for that presence and that respect, but not to the extent where it becomes nothing but fear. That's the way I see it. And I would love for Sheikh Abdul Rahman to answer that as well tomorrow. I feel the way my tarbiyah was given by my parents is very different to how I'm trying to bring my children up. But sometimes I feel I'm imitating how my parents used to react or say things to me, to my own children. How can I overcome this? Wallahi, sometimes it's difficult without knowing the specific examples, but sometimes you could honestly say that it doesn't hurt to be in a middle path. You know, there are a lot of things that that people's parents did, which may seem to be a little old-fashioned or a little rough, but actually there are benefits in them. There are benefits in them. And there's definitely worth learning from your parents the good things that they did. But how do we judge what is good and bad? By Islam. We judge what is good and bad by Islam, and not by modern standards or by what people expect today. So I think, you know, there are, for example, someone says, my parents, you know, my father was just a person to be feared. There was no mercy, no kindness, no affection, no emotion, just fear. Would we say to somebody, you should be the total opposite? Or would we say, take a little bit of that, take the element of respect, a presence, a fact that you have your kids listen to you when you tell them something, but then soften it and make it more gentle. That sometimes is the right way to go, in the sense that we might look at what our parents did and see some of it in a negative light, but actually when we raise our own children, we see that there's a lot of benefit in many of the things that they did, but perhaps we just need to tweak it a little bit to make it nearer to the sunnah. That is one aspect. The other thing is that we by default imitate our parents. And that's why, you know, even the negative traits, many times we can see that we have picked up some of those traits and we kind of pass them on. And that's where we have to be aware. We have to try to learn more about Islam. The more we learn about Islam, the more we learn about our responsibilities towards our children, the more that we can overcome any negative traits we might pick up from our parents or from our society or from our culture. And Allah knows best. Here, one of the questions says, my wife and I are generally working in the same direction. However, I'm generally perceived to be the tougher one of the two, as I want the kids to maintain certain standards in deen and dunya. So the kids gravitate to my wife more. How do I maintain a balance with being lenient and still being firm? Well, that's a really beautiful comment. And it's really good to see, like we said, I don't believe it's the case that all of the kids that we have in AMAU Junior, their fathers are like really absent and distant from them. Not at all, but there are a percentage of issues, and there are many who are doing a great job. So the idea that you and your wife are pulling in the same direction, that's amazing. And like we said, I believe it's perfectly fine for the father to have a certain haiba, a certain presence and a certain amount of discipline, and the mom to be a little softer with them. But what's really important is that the kids don't play one off against the other. And that often can happen when mom is very, very soft and dad is quite firm. It can often be the case that the kids will play one off against the other. So the kids will go to mom and say, Mom, can we please do this? Okay, you can do it. And then they will kind of play that off against dad. To do that, there has to be really good communication between husband and wife. And the wife needs to understand that she doesn't let, through her kindness and her love that she has for her children, she doesn't let her husband be disobeyed in that way. Like, which can happen when the kids play one off against the other, because kids are clever and they use one against the other to make, sort of get some kind of negotiate one against the other. So it's really important for parents to talk to each other. It's really important for mom, if she's very soft and caring, not to allow that to be, you can disobey your dad. Yeah, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what your dad said, you can disobey your dad. Instead, it's really good if mom says, okay, have you spoke to your dad about it? No, we haven't spoke to him. Okay, shall we speak to him? Maybe mom can speak to dad about it. The two parents can talk about it. And then the dad can, see and be a little bit lenient about it and let things go and so on. But at the same time, the kids know there's no way to play mum against dad. And there's no way to get mum and dad to fight through the kids' sort of choice of who they listen to and who they don't listen to. Being lenient is about copying the attributes of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. فَبِمَا رَحْمَةٍ مِّنَ اللَّهِ لِنْتَ لَهُمْ. By a mercy of Allah, you were soft and gentle with them. وَلَوْ كُنْتَ فَضًّا غَلِيظَ الْقَلْبِ لَانْفَضُّوا مِنْ حَوْلِكَ. And if you were harsh and hard-hearted, they would have ran from around you. So that idea of being soft, gentle, and lenient, it comes from copying the Prophet ﷺ, but not losing that presence and that feeling of obedience which the kids should have towards their mom and dad together. If the father doesn't do what you mentioned, what's the advice to the wife? Wallahi, it's a very good question. My advice to her is to be patient and to be gentle with her husband and to encourage him and to remind him. Because the best example of a wife is the wife who helps her husband to obey Allah. And the best example of the husband is the husband who helps his wife to obey Allah. So for her to help her husband to change, rather than to battle against him, rather than to be a war. It's a war, me and him, we're going to clash heads. And it's more to do with supporting him. So sometimes it's because he's not practicing enough. Sometimes he's not praying. Sometimes he's not praying on time, or he's compromising in his religion because of work or because of pressures. So helping him out and helping him to change is really, really important. Being gentle with him. It's always difficult to correct somebody in authority. I mean, a husband or wife is a little easier because the authority is like, there's love there, there's affection there. So it's a little easier to convince him. But generally, like even a child to correct their parents, for a student to correct his teacher, for someone to correct the ruler of a country is not easy. There's an etiquette to doing it. So the idea is not to make them feel like they're being belittled, not to make them feel like you're at war with them, not to make them feel like you're publicly criticizing them in front of the kids. You're a terrible father, and all the kids are listening. But to gently and privately help them to change. And Allah SWT knows best. Is it haram for a mother to take the role of both father and mother if the father is absent? No, I don't think it's haram at all. I think it's just not ideal. But like we said, there are many exceptions. There are times when the father passed away. There are times when the father and mother are divorced and the father just not take responsibility. There are times when the father works away from home. And so for the mother to take on that responsibility is praiseworthy, inshallah. I'm homeschooling my 5-year-old daughter with no device addiction, and her interaction with other kids is very minimal. And all her cousins of her age are busy with devices and singing, dancing, and watching haram. So I don't let her mingle with them. So most of the time she's with us parents and she's the oldest. Does this affect her upbringing as she doesn't meet children of her age? It doesn't affect it in anything except good, inshallah. It will only affect it in good, inshallah. This idea of children mingling with other children their age, in my view, is really overrated, especially when it comes to homeschooling. The number one criticism you hear of homeschooling is, but my child will not meet children of their age. Tarbiyah comes from parents. Tarbiyah doesn't come from other 5-year-old children. 5-year-old children don't give tarbiyah to other 5-year-old children. Parents give tarbiyah to children. That's the first thing. And the second thing is, who said that the child shouldn't meet anybody, but rather the parent selects for them the right people, suhbatun salihah, righteous companions to be around them. 5-year-old is young, but still good people. Bring them sometimes to the masjid, bring them sometimes to the marakis, Islamiyah. Let them mix with people who are like-minded. And if you don't find like-minded people, then keep them with their parents until you find like-minded people. There's nothing that ruins them more than putting them with bad friends, bad company, because of this idea that children need tarbiyah from other children. I'm not saying that children should be isolated, locked in their room and kept in a box and, just brought out from time to time. Of course, children should be able to interact with children their age. But in a homeschool environment, this idea that your child is going to be so deprived and so cut off because they didn't see another 5-year-old today, it just doesn't have any basis, neither in education, nor in child psychology, nor in Islam. So from my point of view, tarbiyah should come from parents, and that the parent should look for good opportunities for their child to mix with people their age who are like-minded, rather than mixing with people who are, spending their time dancing and singing and watching haram. What are the basic steps that a father needs to take to give the kids an Islamic tarbiyah? I think I answered it in a lot of detail in the Muslim Family series, so it's probably a good idea maybe to go back to the Muslim Family series, inshallah, for the details. I think the first thing is to take the mas'uliyah, responsibility. The very first thing is to say, right, this is my responsibility. I'm going to be asked about this. So I need to put in place a team, just like at work. If you're given responsibility for a project, to deliver that project, you need an amazing team. So your team is your wife. Your team is maybe elder siblings. Your team is maybe your Qur'an teacher who comes to the house. Maybe it's the AMAU teachers who teach your kids. You've got this team of people who are all working together to support the tarbiyah of your children. And you are managing that team and managing those resources and making sure that the child is getting that Islamic education. I think also to convey to them Islamic manners and values is really important. Taking your kids out, spending time with them so that they take your manners and values from you and they get that education from you, and making sure that they know their religion. As I said, through that team that you build around you from your wife and the other people that are involved in, that you delegate certain aspects of your child's education to. I think there's a lot to say about it, but I'm just trying to kind of find a summarized way of answering the question. It will be a good question to ask tomorrow as well. And I'm going to take one last question, inshallah. Then we're going to wrap up. And remember, we have another part of this webinar tomorrow. In fact, the more important part of it, which is that, inshallah, Ustad Abdul Rahman will be with us and he'll be sharing a presentation that he has put together, the points he's put together on this topic. A question, what would you advise a father who's working hard outside the home and inside the home for tarbiyah of the kids, but the wife doesn't do anything for the kids' deen, perhaps due to laziness? This is a very, very valid point, and we're not at all saying that the issue is one-sided. There are the reverse. There's the case where the father is so keen for the kids to have a good Islamic upbringing and Islamic education, Islamic values, but maybe the mom feels overwhelmed. Maybe she doesn't know how to do it, or maybe she's struggling with the deen herself. One of the hardest situations is where the father or mother is struggling with the deen themselves, because the basic principle is فاقد الشيء لا يعطي. If you don't have something, you can't give it. If you don't have religion yourself, how are you going to give religion to your children? So that, I would say, is that the father's job in this situation, or the husband's job in this situation, is to help his wife to overcome those difficulties. It could be because she's struggling. Sometimes laziness is a symptom of struggling to manage your workload. At least I like to think it is. Allahu musta'an. Sometimes it can be a symptom that you're struggling to manage your workload and you're struggling with not knowing what to do, or not having concrete steps, or not maybe being able to execute them. So for the father to or the husband to say to his wife, let's work on certain particular things. Let's say, for example, I really want the kids to go to the masjid 5 times a day. And let's say, for example, the mum has a responsibility for maybe Dhuhr, Asr, Maghrib, or something like that, to make sure the kids go to the masjid. She says, look, I'm behind with my prayers. I don't remember. Okay, we'll put an adhan clock. We'll put a reminder. I'll call you at the time for the salah. Some to help her to be able to help those kids. or to find out what's stopping her. If what's stopping her is that she's struggling to practice the religion herself, then supporting her to practice the religion more and making her see how valuable and important that is. I think that's the way to deal with it. And Allah Azza wa Jalla knows best. So this is just the first half of this webinar. The webinar has another half, and that is tomorrow at 7 p.m. UK time, 10 p.m. Dubai time. We'll be joined by Ustad Abdurrahman, inshallah ta'ala, and he'll be presenting his thoughts on the topic, as well as maybe going over some of these questions again, or perhaps taking new questions as well, and hearing his thoughts on the matter. That's what Allah Azza wa Jalla made easy for me to mention this evening, and Allah Azza wa Jalla knows best. Wassalatu wassalam ala nabina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in.